A hand emerges from deep darkness and rests on the head of a blind man. The hand belongs to Aristotle, the philosopher who taught kings, who shaped the way we think for 2,000 years. He's dressed in gold. A heavy chain hangs from his neck, and on that chain, the face of a conqueror who vanquished the entire known world before he turned 33. The blind man whose bust Aristotle is caressing is the most influential poet in all of history, Homer, author of the legendary Odyssey and the Iliad, reduced now to a piece of glowing marble in a dark library. You know their names, you know their glory, but you don't know how their larger-than-life stories came to a tragic and crushing end. Rembrandt buried all of it in this painting. He also buried his own pain here, alongside theirs. And once you see it, you'll never forget it. This masterpiece is called Aristotle with a Bust of Homer, and it was painted by Rembrandt van Rijn in 1653. A Sicilian nobleman commissioned it for his private collection. He didn't tell Rembrandt what to paint. He simply trusted the master to create something extraordinary. And Rembrandt delivered something far beyond a portrait. He delivered a meditation on greatness, on glory, and on the price that every great life eventually pays. Today, the painting hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. In 1961, the Met paid $2.3 million for it, the highest price ever paid for a painting at auction at that time, and it made front-page news around the world. But the real value of this painting isn't in its price tag. It's in what Rembrandt understood about the three men he placed on this canvas, and about himself. This video is part of my series on the masterpieces of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Let's begin by looking at the marble bust, the blind man, Homer. We don't know exactly when Homer lived, somewhere around the 8th century BC probably. We don't know where he was born. We're not even entirely sure he was a single person rather than a name attached to an oral tradition. But we know what was created: the Iliad, the Odyssey, the two poems that became the foundation of Western literature. Every epic that followed, every hero's journey, every tale of war and homecoming, even Star Wars, owes something to Homer. In the Iliad, when Patroclus dies, Achilles cries out in the words of Homer, "My friend Patroclus, whom I loved, is dead. I loved him more than any other comrade. I loved him like my head, my life, myself." That's Homer. That's the kind of raw, devastating emotion he put into the world 3,000 years ago. Words so powerful, we're still feeling them today. And yet, according to ancient accounts, Homer wandered from city to city, blind, reciting his verses for food and shelter. He didn't have any wealth or palace or gold chain around his neck. One ancient tradition actually says that he died on the island of Ios, still wandering and still poor. Another says he died of frustration after failing to solve a riddle posed by a young fisherman. So think about that. The man who gave the world Achilles and Odysseus, who shaped storytelling for thousands of years, may have died stumped by a children's riddle, penniless and blind and unknown in his own time. And now here he is, cold marble in a dark room, being touched by a man dripping in gold. Now look at the golden chain around Aristotle's neck. Look specifically at the medallion hanging from it. That face belongs to Alexander the Great. By the age of 30, Alexander had conquered the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. Greece, Persia, Egypt, all the way to the borders of India. He never lost a single battle. His men called him a god, and some of them meant it literally. Aristotle had been his tutor. When Alexander was just 13 years old, his father, King Philip, hired the greatest philosopher alive to educate his son. For 3 years, Aristotle taught the young prince everything: literature, science, medicine, philosophy. But Alexander wasn't alone in those lessons. Beside him was another young man, his closest companion since childhood. His name was Hephaestion. The two were inseparable. They studied together under Aristotle. They fought side by side in every campaign. And according to Plutarch, Alexander loved Hephaestion best of all of his companions. When they visited the ruins of Troy together, Alexander laid a wreath on the tomb of Achilles, and Hephaestion laid one on the tomb of Patroclus. The message was clear to everyone watching. They saw themselves as the legendary lovers reborn. And Alexander never forgot what Aristotle taught him. Even while conquering the world, he kept a copy of the Iliad, annotated by Aristotle himself, under his pillow. He slept with Homer's words beside his head. But here is where Alexander's story turns. In 324 BC, Hephaestion fell ill with a fever. Alexander rushed to his side, but arrived too late. His beloved was dead. What followed was grief beyond all measure. According to Plutarch, Alexander flung himself on the body and lay there nearly all day in tears. He had to be dragged away by force. He refused food for days. He cut his hair, just as Achilles had done for Patroclus. He ordered all music banned throughout the empire. He even had Hephaestion's doctor executed. Alexander petitioned the gods to grant Hephaestion divine status so they could be reunited in the afterlife. 8 months later, Alexander himself was dead at only 32 years old. Was it poison? Disease? Grief? Historians still argue about it. We know for certain that the man who conquered the world couldn't survive the loss of the one he loved the most. And the moment he died, his empire began to tear itself apart. His generals turned on each other. His family was murdered. Within 1 generation, everything he built had fragmented into warring kingdoms. And now we come to the man at the center of the painting, Aristotle himself. Before we continue, if you'd love to have this painting in your home, you can find it through the link in the description. In my catalog, you'll discover many more works by Rembrandt, including his other masterpieces like The Night Watch, The Return of the Prodigal Son, and others. So you can start your own art collection and turn your home into your own personal museum. Shipping's free worldwide, and by purchasing from me, you'll be helping so much to continue creating great videos like this. Now, back to the story. If Homer was the voice of poetry and Alexander the fist of power, Aristotle was the mind that tried to understand everything. Logic, ethics, politics, biology, physics, and metaphysics. He wrote about all of it. For nearly 2,000 years after his death, Aristotle wasn't just a philosopher, he was the philosopher. And that's what medieval scholars referred to him as if no other name were necessary. He was wealthy. He was celebrated. He founded a school in Athens called the Lyceum that shaped generations of thinkers. He wore that golden chain, a gift from kings, a symbol of his worldly success. But look at him in this painting by Rembrandt. Look at his face. Does this look like a man enjoying his success? His eyes are shadowed. His expression is heavy and uncertain. His hand reaches not toward the gold, but toward the blind poet who had nothing. And Rembrandt knew why. Because Aristotle's story didn't end in triumph. It ended in exile. When Alexander died, a wave of anti-Macedonian feeling swept through Athens. Aristotle, closely associated with the conqueror, became a target. He was charged with impiety, the same charge that had condemned Socrates to death decades earlier. So Aristotle fled. He reportedly said he would not allow Athens to sin twice against philosophy. He escaped to the island of Euboea, and there, just 1 year later, he passed away. All alone, in exile, far from the city and the school that he had built. The greatest mind in the ancient world, running for his life and dying in obscurity. But there's a fourth man in this painting. You just can't see him, but he's everywhere. Rembrandt painted this in 1653. And if you want to understand why this painting feels so heavy, so shadowed, and so full of unspoken grief, you have to understand what was happening in Rembrandt's own life. Just a decade earlier, Rembrandt had been the most celebrated painter in Amsterdam. Wealthy, famous, commissions pouring in, he'd bought a grand house filled with art and curiosities. He had a beautiful wife, Saskia, whom he adored. And then it all began to crumble. Saskia died in 1642. Rembrandt spent recklessly trying to fill the void. Creditors circled. His style of painting, dark, emotional, deeply human, was actually falling out of fashion. The Dutch wanted lighter, more refined work. By the time he painted Aristotle with a bust of Homer, Rembrandt was drowning in debt. And within a few years, he would be declared bankrupt. His house would be seized, and his collection and everything that he'd gathered would be auctioned off. He'd also bury his son. He buried his partner. He'd die in 1669, nearly forgotten in a rented room. Rembrandt looked at Homer, Aristotle, and Alexander, and I think he saw himself. He saw the wreckage that greatness often leaves behind, and he painted it with a tenderness and an honesty that still stops people in their tracks 4 centuries later. The Greeks had a word, Eros, and we usually translate that as love or desire, but it actually means something deeper. Eros was the force that drove all of creation, the longing that makes poets write, philosophers think, conquerors march, and painters pick up a brush. Look at this painting again. Look at Aristotle's hand on Homer's head. That's not just respect. It's longing. That's a man reaching towards something he can't quite touch. Beauty, meaning, the kind of immortality that only art, perhaps, can offer. Homer knew Eros. He wrote Achilles crying out for Patroclus. I loved him like my head, my life, myself. Alexander knew it too. He couldn't survive Hephaestion's death. Rembrandt knew it. He lost Saskia and poured his grief into canvas after canvas. The passion that drives us toward another person is the same passion that drives us to create. They're actually inseparable, and Rembrandt understood that. That's why this painting feels so alive to us. It's not just an idea about philosophy or fame. It's the flesh and the gold and the shadow, the weight of desire. It's what happens when a man who has lost everything he loves picks up a brush and tries to make sense of it. So here we are, 4 men, 4 lives, 4 trajectories of extraordinary achievement and devastating loss. And yet, we're still here talking about them. Homer's words are still being read. Aristotle's ideas still shape how we think. Alexander's legend still captures our imagination, and Rembrandt's brushstrokes still glow in a museum in New York City, stopping strangers in their tracks. We're reminded that greatness doesn't protect you from tragedy, that glory fades. The chain is heavy, and in the end, you have to take it off. But there's something else here too, I think a quieter truth. The work remains. The thing that you make with your hands, with your mind, with your soul. If it's honest and if it's true, it might just outlast you. Not because you sought fame, but because the work you did was worth it for its own sake. Something eternal passes through us when we live that way, even if we never get to see it. And that, I think, is what this painting is all about. That's what Rembrandt buried in here, alongside Homer and Aristotle and Alexander. A reminder, a question, and a hope. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Which of these three men's stories moved you the most? And do you think there's something that truly lasts beyond our own lives? Thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you in the next video where we continue our exploration of the great masterpieces of the world.